James Wilson wiped the sweat from his brow as the Georgia sun beat down on his back. At 58 years old, his hands were tough and calloused from decades of working the soil. This 20-acre farm outside of Macon was his pride and joy, land that his grandfather had purchased back in 1945 after returning from World War II. Every morning for the past 30 years, James woke before dawn. He would brew a pot of strong coffee, pull on his warm boots, and head out to tend his crops. The farm specialized in organic vegetables that people drove miles to purchase. His tomatoes were famous throughout the county, and his sweet corn sold out within hours of being harvested. Another beautiful day, James murmured to himself as he walked between rows of vegetables, checking the soil moisture and looking for any signs of pests or disease. But lately, something had been bothering him. The numbers weren't adding up. James kept careful records of everything he planted and harvested, a habit his father had taught him. Last week, he counted 48 ripe heirloom tomatoes ready for Saturday's farmer's market. By Friday evening, only 32 remained. The week before, almost half his crop of purple hull peas had vanished overnight. At first, James thought it might be animals, maybe raccoons or deer breaking through his fencing. But animals didn't take just the right vegetables while leaving the plants undamaged. Animals didn't pick only the premium crops. And animals certainly didn't leave tire tracks leading from the county road to the edge of his property. Someone's stealing from me, James realized, anger rising in his chest as he knelt to examine another stripped tomato plant. That evening, James called his son Marcus, who worked as an IT specialist in Atlanta. "Someone's taking from the farm, son. I need to find out who." 2 days later, Marcus arrived with a set of motion-activated trail cameras. They placed them strategically around the property, hidden in trees and fence posts overlooking the most valuable crops. For 3 days, James checked the cameras, finding nothing unusual. But on Thursday morning, he reviewed the footage and froze. There, clear as day, was a white woman in her late 40s driving an expensive SUV with out-of-state plates. The timestamp showed 5:42 a.m., just before dawn. The woman parked near his best tomato plants, pulled out several reusable shopping bags, and filled them methodically with his finest produce. "Well, I'll be," James muttered, watching as the woman checked her surroundings before driving away with nearly $200 worth of his hard work. Later that day, James showed the footage to Sheriff Daniels, a man he'd known since high school. "That's Patricia Harrington," the sheriff said, frowning at the image. "Moved here about 6 months ago from Connecticut. Bought the old Maxwell place up on Ridge Road." "Well, she's stealing from me, Tom. What are you going to do about it?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "James, you know how things are. It's her word against yours, and these cameras, well, they're on your property. I can talk to her, give her a warning, but without more evidence." James understood what wasn't being said. In their small Georgia town, some things hadn't changed as much as people like to pretend. "Fine," James said tightly. "I'll handle it myself." As he drove home, James's mind raced with thoughts. This wasn't just about stolen vegetables. This was about respect, about the years of work he put into building his business, about his right to the fruits of his labor. That night, James sat on his porch thinking, if Patricia Harrington thought she could take advantage of him, she was about to learn a hard lesson. One way or another, the stealing would stop. For the next week, James kept careful watch on his farm. The cameras caught Patricia Harrington 3 more times, always before sunrise, always taking the best produce. She worked with the confidence of someone who believed they would never face consequences. On Tuesday morning, James decided to confront her directly. He woke up extra early and waited in his old pickup truck near the field where she usually parked. When the gleaming white SUV pulled up at 5:30 a.m., James was ready. Patricia stepped out wearing expensive gardening gloves and carrying her designer shopping bags. She was dressed in what looked like a brand new outfit from some outdoor clothing catalog, complete with a wide-brimmed hat. James waited until she had filled one bag with his prized beefsteak tomatoes before he turned on his truck's headlights. The sudden light made Patricia freeze like a deer caught in headlights. James stepped out of his vehicle. "Morning, ma'am," he said politely, keeping his distance. "Can I help you find something on my property?" Patricia's shock quickly turned to indignation. She straightened her back and looked down her nose at James, even though he stood several inches taller. "I'm just gathering a few things from the community garden," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. James raised an eyebrow. This isn't a community garden, Mrs. Harrington. This is my farm, my private property, and those are my tomatoes you're taking. Patricia's face hardened. Do you know who I am? My husband is a very important businessman. I don't care if your husband is the president himself, James replied calmly. You're stealing from me. I have it all on camera, 4 times now. Patricia's eyes darted around nervously, but her voice grew louder. How dare you accuse me? I was simply checking to see if these vegetables were being properly cared for. They looked neglected. James almost laughed at the absurdity. His farm was known for having the most carefully tended crops in the county. He'd won agricultural awards 3 years running. Mrs. Harrington, I'm asking you politely to return what you've taken and leave my property. If you need vegetables, I sell them at the farmer's market every Saturday, or you can come by during business hours and purchase them directly. Patricia threw the bag of tomatoes on the ground, crushing several under her expensive boots. I don't need to buy anything from you, she sneered. And you should be careful who you accuse. People like you shouldn't throw around accusations at people like me. The meaning behind her words was clear. James felt a familiar anger rise in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. People like me? Farmers? He asked quietly. Patricia didn't answer. She got back into her SUV and drove away, tires spitting gravel. James picked up the crushed tomatoes, feeling the sticky juice on his fingers. These were heirloom varieties he'd been growing for decades. Each seed had been carefully saved from the previous year's best plants. To see them destroyed so carelessly made his blood boil. The next day, James installed more cameras and a better lock on his gate. But when he arrived at the farm Thursday morning, he found the lock cut and nearly half of his almost ripe watermelons missing. The tire tracks matched Patricia's SUV perfectly. This time, James drove straight to the sheriff's office with the new footage. Sheriff Daniels watched the video with a grimace. James, I'll pay her a visit today. But honestly, courts tend to see this as a minor issue. It'll probably just be a warning. James looked the sheriff straight in the eye. Tom, we've known each other 40 years. If someone was stealing from your business every week, would you call it minor? The sheriff had the decency to look ashamed. I'll talk to her, James. That's all I can promise for now. As James drove home, his mind was already working on a plan. If the law wouldn't protect his livelihood, you would have to find another way to stop the thief. Sheriff Daniels' talk with Patricia clearly had no effect. The very next day, James discovered his prize bell peppers had been harvested overnight. The security footage showed Patricia again, this time with a large basket, methodically selecting only the ripest vegetables. She even had the nerve to bring garden shears, carefully cutting each pepper rather than pulling them. James sat at his kitchen table, looking through his farm ledger. In the past month alone, he estimated he'd lost over $2,000 in produce. For a small family farm, this was a serious blow. The farmer's market was his main source of income, and with each theft, he had less to sell. His phone rang, breaking his concentration. Hello, Mr. Wilson. This is Diane from Mackin Fresh Eats restaurant. Diane was the head chef at one of the nicest farm-to-table restaurants in the area. I wanted to thank you for the delivery yesterday, but I have to say, your prices have gotten quite high. James frowned. What delivery? I didn't make any deliveries yesterday. There was a pause on the line. A woman came by with some beautiful heirloom tomatoes and peppers. Said she was your new distribution partner. She charged us nearly double what you usually do, but the produce looked so good. James gripped the phone tighter. What did this woman look like? As Diane described Patricia, James felt his anger turn cold and focused. Patricia wasn't just stealing for herself, she was selling his produce to his own customers. That afternoon, James drove to Patricia's house, a large, newly renovated farmhouse on 5 acres of land that she hadn't bothered to cultivate. 3 luxury cars sat in the circular driveway. James parked his truck and knocked on the front door. Patricia opened it, her smile disappearing when she saw who it was. What do you want? She demanded. I know what you've been doing, James said evenly. You're selling my produce to restaurants and claiming it's yours. Patricia's face flushed. I don't know what you're talking about. Diane at Mackin Fresh Eats says differently. You're not just stealing from me now, you're damaging my business relationships. Patricia stepped onto her porch, closing the door behind her. When she spoke, Her voice was low and threatening. "Listen to me carefully. My husband is good friends with Judge Williams. Do you really think anyone's going to take your word over mine about some vegetables? I moved here for the country lifestyle, and part of that lifestyle is fresh produce." "That you didn't grow?" James pointed out. Patricia laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. "Prove it. Those restaurants will believe whatever I tell them. I'm a respected community member with connections. What are you? Just some old black farmer who probably doesn't even legally own that land." James had to take a deep breath to control his temper. "My family has owned that farm for 3 generations. I have every legal right." "Save it," Patricia interrupted. "If you keep pushing this, you'll regret it. One call from me, and the health department will be crawling all over your little farm operation. I bet they'll find all sorts of violations." James looked at her carefully. "Is that a threat, Mrs. Harrington?" "It's a promise. Now get off my property before I call the police and tell them you're trespassing and threatening me." "Who do you think they'll believe?" As James drove away, he called his son Marcus. "How soon can you come out to the farm? I need your help with something." "Dad, what's going on? You sound upset." James explained the situation in detail. When he finished, Marcus was silent for a moment. "She can't get away with this," Marcus finally said. "The law should protect you." "Should, but won't," James replied. "Not fast enough anyway. I'm losing crops every day, and now she's damaging my reputation with restaurants." "So what's your plan?" Marcus asked. For the first time that day, James smiled. "I've been thinking about making some improvements to our irrigation system. Something special for our unwanted visitor." "Dad?" "Nothing dangerous," James assured him. "Just something to teach a lesson about taking what isn't hers. Can you come this weekend?" Marcus sighed. "I'll be there Friday night. Try not to do anything until I arrive, okay?" As James hung up, he looked out over his fields, determination setting his jaw firm. One way or another, the stealing would stop. Marcus arrived Friday evening, his small car packed with equipment. Father and son stayed up late into the night, discussing options at the kitchen table. "I brought something that might help," Marcus said, pulling out a small device from his bag. "It's a cellular trail camera. Better quality than what we have now, and it uploads the photos directly to the cloud. If she steals it or destroys it, we'll still have the evidence." James nodded appreciatively. "Smart thinking. But we need more than just evidence. Sheriff's already seen the footage and done nothing." Marcus spread out a map of the farm on the table. "What exactly are you thinking, Dad?" James pointed to the northeast section of his property. "This area gets the morning sun first. It's where I grow my premium crops, and it's her favorite spot to steal from. I want to modify the irrigation system there." "Modify how?" Marcus asked cautiously. "Remember that gray water recycling system we installed 3 years ago? The one that collects rinse water and rainwater for irrigation during dry spells?" Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "Well," James continued, "I've also got that septic holding tank that needs pumping. The one that collects waste from the processing shed. It's not dangerous. Just dirty water from washing vegetables and some organic matter. But it sure doesn't smell good." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Dad, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm not going to hurt anyone," James said firmly. "But if someone happens to steal vegetables that have been watered with smelly but harmless gray water, well, that's not my fault, is it?" The next morning, they got to work. Marcus, who had inherited his father's mechanical abilities, helped install a secondary irrigation line that could be switched between the clean water system and the gray water tank. They carefully marked which plants would be watered by the special system. "This isn't illegal, right?" Marcus asked as they finished the installation. "Completely legal," James assured him. "I'm just watering some of my crops with recycled water, which many farms do. The water isn't harmful, just unpleasant, and I'm not forcing anyone to steal my vegetables." On Sunday afternoon, with the system installed, Marcus reluctantly headed back to Atlanta. "Be careful, Dad. This woman sounds vindictive. She might escalate things." "I can handle Patricia Harrington," James said, hugging his son goodbye. Monday morning, James watched as Patricia's SUV pulled up to his farm. This time, she drove directly into the field, her tires crushing several young plants. James gritted his teeth but stayed hidden. Through his binoculars, he watched as she headed straight for his premium section, filling bag after bag with his best produce. As soon as she left, James called his lawyer, Michael Green. "Michael, I need your help. I'm going to email you some security footage. I want to file formal charges against Patricia Harrington for theft and property damage." "James, we've been through this. The DA probably won't." "Just have the paperwork ready," James interrupted. "Things are about to change." That evening, James activated the special irrigation system. The smelly water from the processing tank flowed through the lines, soaking the soil around his premium vegetables. The smell was noticeable but would dissipate by morning. The vegetables themselves would absorb some of the water overnight. "Let's see how you like selling these to restaurants," James muttered. The next day, James received a call from his friend Robert, who owned the local farmers market. "James, did you know that Patricia Harrington is selling produce at the east side of the market? She's telling everyone she grows the same varieties as you, but at a bigger farm with better methods. She's undercutting your prices by 15%. James smiled grimly. "Is that right? Well, don't worry about it, Robert. I have a feeling her business won't last very long." As he hung up, James checked his security app. The new camera showed Patricia's SUV approaching his farm again, right on schedule. "Dinner is served, Mrs. Harrington," James said to himself, watching as she headed straight for the specially watered crops. "Enjoy your harvest." Patricia's routine had become predictable. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, she arrived at James's farm just before sunrise. Her expensive SUV would pull up to the edge of his property, and she would spend approximately 20 minutes selecting the best produce before driving away with her stolen goods. On Thursday morning, James woke up at 4:00 a.m., a full hour earlier than usual. He made himself a strong cup of coffee and sat by his kitchen window, which offered a clear view of the section of his farm now irrigated with the special water system. In the pre-dawn darkness, he could barely make out the shapes of his plants, but he knew Patricia would arrive soon. At precisely 5:22 a.m., headlights appeared on the dirt road leading to his farm. James took a sip of his coffee and watched as Patricia's white SUV pulled up next to his premium vegetable section. Through his binoculars, he could see her getting out of the vehicle, designer bags in hand, wearing what looked like expensive gardening clothes and rubber boots. "Right on time," James muttered to himself. Patricia worked quickly, moving from plant to plant with practiced efficiency. She selected only the best-looking vegetables, the ripest tomatoes, the most perfectly formed bell peppers, the largest eggplants. James had to admit she had a good eye for quality produce. Too bad she didn't have the decency to pay for it. After filling 3 large bags, Patricia carefully arranged the stolen vegetables in the back of her SUV and drove away. James checked his watch. The entire theft had taken less than 15 minutes. James picked up his phone and dialed Marcus. "She took the bait," he said when his son answered. "All of it?" Marcus asked, sounding both concerned and a little excited. "Every last piece. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, even some of the herbs I planted in that section." Marcus whistled. "That's a lot of contaminated produce. What do you think she'll do with it all?" "Based on what Robert told me, she'll probably try to sell some at the farmer's market on Saturday, and I bet she'll make deliveries to those restaurants today." "Do you think she'll notice the smell?" Marcus asked. James chuckled. "The vegetables don't smell that bad right now. The irrigation water soaked into the soil mostly, but once she washes them or cuts into them, you let the sentence hang." "Dad, I'm still not sure about this. What if she figures out what you did?" "What exactly did I do?" James replied innocently. "I watered my crops with recycled water, which is perfectly legal. It's not my fault if someone steals those crops." After hanging up, James went about his normal farming routine, though he made sure to avoid the special section. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds were gathering, and a light rain began to fall. James smiled to himself. The rain would wash away any lingering smell from the soil, removing evidence of what he had done. Around 5:00 p.m., James's phone rang. It was Diane from Meccan Fresh Eats restaurant. "Mr. Wilson, I need to speak with you about something uncomfortable," she began, her voice tense. "We received a delivery of produce today that was supposedly from your farm, though not delivered by you." "Let me guess," James said. Patricia Harrington? Yes, Diane confirmed. The thing is, Mr. Wilson, the produce was, well, there's no polite way to say this. It smelled terrible, like sewage. We had to throw everything away and sanitize our entire kitchen. James feigned surprise. That's very strange. I can assure you none of the produce I deliver has ever had that problem. I believe you, Diane said firmly. Which is why I'm calling. Mrs. Harrington insisted the vegetables came from your farm, but something doesn't add up. Have you had any issues with your crops recently? James chose his words carefully. My crops are fine, Diane, but I have had some issues with theft recently. Mrs. Harrington has been taking produce from my farm without permission. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I see, Diane finally said. That explains a lot. Mr. Wilson, I think we need to have a longer conversation about our supply arrangement. Can you come by the restaurant tomorrow? As James hung up, he allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. The trap had been sprung. Friday morning brought a storm of activity to James's normally quiet farm. His phone rang constantly with calls from local restaurants and community members. Word was spreading fast about Patricia's smelly vegetables. Mr. Wilson, this is Chef Anthony from Harvest Table. The voice on the phone sounded upset. A woman sold us what she claimed were your premium tomatoes and peppers yesterday. When my sous chef cut into them this morning, the smell was so bad we had to evacuate the kitchen. James listened patiently, offering sympathetic responses while carefully explaining that Patricia had been stealing from his farm. By noon, he had received similar calls from 3 other restaurants and 2 local grocery stores. Around 2 o'clock, James spotted a familiar white SUV speeding down his driveway. He stepped onto his porch just as Patricia slammed her car door and marched toward him, her face flushed with anger. What did you do to your vegetables? She demanded, stopping at the bottom of his porch steps. James leaned against the porch railing. I'm not sure what you mean, Mrs. Harrington. Is there a problem with some vegetables? Don't play dumb with me. Patricia's voice rose sharply. The produce I took from your farm smells like raw sewage. I've been humiliated in front of the entire town. James raised his eyebrows. The produce you took? You mean the produce you stole from my farm without permission? The produce you then sold to my customers while pretending it came from your farm? Patricia's eyes narrowed. You did something to those plants. You contaminated them somehow. All I did was water my crops, James replied calmly. I use a recycled water system on some sections of my farm. It's perfectly legal and environmentally friendly. Recycled water? Patricia repeated, her voice dropping. What kind of recycled water? Gray water mostly. Some from my vegetable washing station, some from other sources around the farm. James shrugged. It's all organic. The realization dawned on Patricia's face. You set me up. You deliberately watered those plants with wastewater, knowing I would take them. I watered my own plants on my own property with legally acceptable irrigation. James corrected her. What happened after that was entirely due to your actions, not mine. Patricia's hands balled into fists. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? I brought those vegetables to the country club luncheon yesterday. I gave them to the mayor's wife. My reputation is ruined. Despite his anger over her thefts, James couldn't help feeling a twinge of satisfaction at her distress. Perhaps you should have thought about reputations before stealing from me and damaging mine. This isn't over, Patricia hissed. My husband will sue you for everything you're worth. James shook his head. I don't think that would be wise, Mrs. Harrington. I have weeks of video evidence showing you trespassing and stealing from my farm. I have testimonials from restaurant owners confirming you sold them stolen goods. And I haven't even mentioned the property damage from your vehicle driving over my crops. Patricia opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time since James had met her, she seemed at a loss for words. Here's what's going to happen, James continued, his voice level. You're going to stop stealing from my farm. You're going to stop selling your produce to my customers. And you're going to pay me back for everything you've taken over the past month. And if I refuse? Patricia managed to ask, though with less conviction than before. James smiled. Then I'll press charges for theft and fraud, and I'll make sure every restaurant and grocery store in the county knows exactly where their smelly vegetables came from. He paused. I hear the story's already spreading quite fast at the country club. Patricia's face paled. Without another word, she turned and walked back to her SUV. As she drove away, gravel spraying from her tires, James remained on his porch, watching until their car disappeared from view. That evening, James called Marcus to update him on the confrontation. "Do you think she'll really stop?" Marcus asked. "We'll know soon enough," James replied, looking out at his fields. "But something tells me she'll think twice before stealing from me again." Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the farmer's market. James loaded his truck with fresh produce, carefully harvested from the untreated sections of his farm, and made the familiar drive into town. As he set up his stand, he noticed people glancing his way and whispering. Clearly, news of Patricia's smelly vegetable disaster had spread throughout the community. "Morning, James," called Robert, the market manager, walking over with a coffee in hand. "Quite the excitement you've caused." James arranged his tomatoes in neat rows. "I didn't cause anything, Robert. I just watered my crops." Robert laughed, a deep belly laugh that turned heads. "Well, however you want to put it, you become the talk of the town. Did you hear about what happened at the country club?" James shook his head. "Patricia Harrington brought a big salad made with her homegrown vegetables to the ladies' luncheon yesterday. When they started eating, the smell was so bad they had to open all the windows. Mrs. Peterson, the bank president's wife, actually got sick right there on the tablecloth." James winced to spite himself. "That bad?" "Worse," Robert said, lowering his voice. The club manager asked where the vegetables came from, and Patricia proudly announced they were from her farm. Then Diane from Mackin Fresh Eats spoke up and said those same vegetables had made her restaurant smell like a sewage plant, in front of everyone. Before James could respond, he noticed a commotion at the market entrance. Patricia Harrington was making her way through the crowd, her husband, a tall man in an expensive golf shirt, by her side. They were heading straight for James's stand. "That's him, Howard," Patricia said loudly, pointing at James. "That's the man who contaminated his crops to sabotage me." Howard Harrington, red-faced and clearly angry, stepped up to James's table. "Mr. Wilson, my wife tells me you deliberately set a trap for her using contaminated water on your vegetables." James met the man's gaze calmly. "Mr. Harrington, your wife has been trespassing on my property and stealing my crops for over a month. I have video evidence of every theft. What she does with stolen produce is not my concern." "Stealing? That's ridiculous," Howard scoffed, though his eyes darted nervously to the growing crowd of market-goers who had gathered to watch the confrontation. "My wife would never." "It's true, Howard," interrupted a woman's voice. Diane from Mackin Fresh Eats stepped forward. "Mrs. Harrington has been selling Mr. Wilson's produce to my restaurant, claiming it was from her farm. We've been loyal customers of Mr. Wilson for years. I recognized his heirloom varieties immediately." Another voice joined in. "She sold me some too, claimed she grew it herself. It was Chef Anthony from Harvest Table. My kitchen smelled like a sewer all day yesterday because of those vegetables." Howard Harrington looked at his wife, confusion and embarrassment washing over his face. "Patricia, what are they talking about?" Patricia's confident demeanor began to crumble. "They're exaggerating, Howard. I just took a few things. James has so many vegetables, he wouldn't even miss them." "A few things?" James reached under his table and pulled out a folder. "According to my records, you've stolen approximately $2,300 worth of produce in the last month alone, not counting the damage to my young plants when you drove your car into my fields." The crowd murmured, and Howard Harrington's face grew even redder, now from embarrassment rather than anger. "Mr. Wilson," he said, his voice lower, "I had no idea. I assure you, I'll make this right." "Howard," Patricia protested. "You can't be serious." He deliberately. "Enough, Patricia." Her husband cut her off sharply. He turned back to James. "I apologize for my wife's behavior. Please send me an invoice for everything she's taken, and for any damage caused." James nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. That would be acceptable. As the Harringtons turned to leave, the crowd at the farmer's market parted silently. Patricia walked with her head down, avoiding the stares of the community members she had tried so hard to impress. Robert clapped James on the shoulder. "Well, that's something you don't see every day." James smiled, arranging the last of his tomatoes. "No, I suppose it isn't. By mid-morning, James had sold almost everything he brought to the market. It seemed everyone in town wanted to buy vegetables from the clever farmer who had outsmarted the thief. The weeks following the farmer's market confrontation brought significant changes to James Wilson's life. True to his word, Howard Harrington sent a check covering the full amount of James's losses, along with a formally written apology. The envelope also contained a signed agreement promising that Patricia would never set foot on James's property again. James used the money to upgrade his farm's security system. Marcus helped him install proper gates with electronic locks and additional cameras covering the entire perimeter. The new system sent alerts directly to James's phone if anyone entered his property after hours. "Do you think she'll try again?" Marcus asked as they finished mounting the last camera. James shook his head. "I doubt it. Patricia Harrington cares more about her social standing than anything else. After what happened at the country club and farmer's market, she wouldn't dare risk another humiliation." He was right. Patricia and Howard had become noticeably scarce around town. Rumors circulated that Patricia had checked into a wellness retreat in Arizona, though most locals suspected this was just a convenient excuse to escape the embarrassment. One sunny morning in late summer, Sheriff Daniels pulled up to James's farmhouse. James was washing freshly harvested carrots at his outdoor sink. "Morning, Tom," James called, drying his hands on a towel. "What brings you out here?" The sheriff looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Got some news I thought you might want to hear directly from me." He took off his hat. "The Harringtons are selling their house, moving back north, from what I understand." James nodded slowly. "Can't say I'm surprised." "There's something else," Sheriff Daniels continued. "I owe you an apology, James. I should have taken your complaints more seriously from the beginning. When a citizen reports a crime, it's my job to investigate properly, regardless of who's involved." James studied his old classmate's face. "Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that." After the sheriff left, James called Marcus to share the news. They talked for a while about the changes the incident had brought to the farm and the community. "You know what's strange, Dad?" Marcus said. "In a weird way, Patricia's thefts ended up being good for business." It was true. The story of James' clever trap had spread throughout the county and beyond. A reporter from the state newspaper had even come to interview him for a feature story on small farm security. Local restaurants proudly advertised that they served authentic Wilson Farm produce directly from the source. James had gained several new commercial clients, and his stand at the farmer's market consistently sold out earlier than ever before. The following Saturday, James arrived at the market to find a surprise waiting at his usual spot. A group of local farmers had gathered, and they greeted him with applause as he pulled up. "What's all this about?" James asked, confused. Robert stepped forward with a small plaque. "The Macon County Farmers Association voted unanimously to recognize you for your contributions to local agriculture and your creative approach to farm security." James laughed as he accepted the plaque, which was engraved with the words, "James Wilson, protecting farm heritage with innovation and integrity." As he set up his stand that morning, several farmers came by to share their own stories of theft and property damage. They asked James for advice on securing their farms and protecting their livelihoods. The simple truth, James told them, is that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself when no one else will. But you have to be smart about it. Use the system when you can, and when you can't, well, get creative. That evening, as the sun set over his fields, James sat on his porch with a glass of sweet tea. His phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Did you see the newspaper today? Your famous dad." James smiled and looked out over the land his grandfather had purchased decades ago. The farm had weathered many challenges over the years: drought, flood, economic hardship, and now Patricia Harrington. Through it all, the Wilson family had persevered with determination, integrity, and when necessary, a little creative problem-solving. Some lessons, James thought as he sipped his tea, are best learned the hard way.